I'm Dr. Lisa Colledge, and I'm the CEO and founder of Lisa Colledge Consulting. And I work with organizations to use the best practices that we can learn from neurodivergence inclusion to build cognitively inclusive cultures, which are the most engaging and attractive and innovative cultures that you can offer to your talent. In this episode of Culture by Neurodesign, I want to address the rumor that DEI is dead, DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, the DEI is dead, from the perspective of you feeling unable to participate in the discussion. And this is something that I often hear from straight white men who quite often have challenges seeing themselves as a part of the DEI conversation. I'm someone who likes to apply structure to the feedback that I get, especially when it's kind of messy feedback, especially when it's complex and emotional and so on. I will try to put things into categories so that I can understand it and address it. And so I'm going to share with you the reasons that I have heard from straight white men as to why they find it difficult sometimes to engage with DEI. 3 reasons. First reason is that it can feel irrelevant to them personally. The second reason is that it feels like a nice to have. It just doesn't feel like such a priority compared to all of the other things that they need to prioritize. And the third is that it can feel really intimidating, right? It's scary to start having an opinion and saying things in this area. There can be a backlash if you say things wrong, or if somebody doesn't agree with you. It can feel quite intimidating. In this episode, which is called DEI and the Straight White Male, What Can I Contribute? I want to talk about each of these feelings that may be encouraging straight white men not to participate in DEI. Right, from now on, I'm not going to say straight white men or straight white male. I'm going to say you, all right? If I keep saying, instead of you every time, straight white men or straight white male, this is going to get extremely repetitive and very tiresome and 25% longer than it needs to be very, very quickly. So I hope that you will bear with me. If you're not a straight white male and you're interested in listening to this podcast, you're still very, very welcome. But I'm going to use that shorthand from now on, okay? I want to say another word about my approach as well in this podcast. Now, if you're here expecting me to be bashing straight white men for being straight and white and men, and for the privilege that they have undoubtedly experienced over the last many years, then you are in the wrong place. That's not what I'm going to be doing in this episode at all. So if that's what you want, please switch off now and avoid your disappointment. Of course, straight white men have been privileged historically. There still are. 9 out of 10 CEOs are men, even these days. But if we want to make progress in the area of DEI, if we want to make our workplaces more inclusive and more successful as a result, then we need to engage the leadership majority. And it's just a fact that that means straight white men. So I'm going to start by talking through each of those 3 areas that I mentioned a little while ago. And I'm going to start with the challenge that for straight white men, for you, DEI can feel irrelevant to your situation. All right, you're straight, you're white, you're a man. You're not gay, you're not female, and you're not of colour. But I'm going to suggest that DEI is still extremely relevant to you, okay? DEI is about including people who are different from us. So really what this is about is finding relevance because you can understand how you're different from other people. We want to find a situation in which you've experienced difference and in which you would value people behaving towards you in a way in which you feel included. That's how you can find relevance in DEI for yourself. So let me share a few examples. If you're thinking, like, what is she talking about? I'll share a few examples and see if this gives you any ideas yourself. So the first one, there's a decent chance if you're a successful white male, that you're older, right? You're from a different generation from the new talent that's just starting to come through. Maybe you're a baby boomer, maybe you used to be a hippie, maybe you remember when the Rolling Stones came first on the scene. Lucky you, I wish that I had been there. But that's different from the talent who is emerging now and starting to apply for roles in your organization now. Maybe you are Generation X, like me, and you remember getting the first enormously blocky, heavy, expensive mobile phone. And maybe you wonder, also like me, getting an email account and thinking, well, great, like who on earth can I contact? Who's at the other end of this thing? Nobody's really using it yet. Unthinkable for people nowadays, of course, for the Generation Z, Generation Z, who are starting to join our teams, who've never not known the internet, who expect to have work-life balance, who expect your organization to be socially relevant and inclusive, and use that as a criterion in deciding whether to accept your job offer or not. These are examples of difference, generational difference. And probably you have taken trouble to learn what motivates people from different generations and make sure that you're relevant to them. There you go. DEI is relevant to you. Another example. Perhaps you have a different educational background from most of your peers. Maybe you, shock horror, do not have an MBA, and maybe you spent more time learning on the job. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you did spend more time investing in further education and have less lived experience. That's still an example of difference. And I bet that you appreciate it when people take steps to make you feel included in the generally different team that you may be part of. Now, I'm talking about this in a corporate context, and I think that's probably the context that most of us tend to think about. But of course, there are plenty of professions where things work the other way around. Female-oriented professions where men are the exception. One example is nursing, which I think about first because my brother-in-law is a nurse. He's an extremely good nurse, but nursing is traditionally a female-oriented profession, just like horse riding or just like dancing. So maybe there are situations where you're not in the majority as a man. This can work in both directions. And maybe, final example, maybe it's not about you at all. Maybe it's about somebody who's close to you. Right? Maybe your child is different. Maybe your best friend's child is different. Maybe they're autistic. Maybe they're dyslexic. Maybe something terrible has happened to them and they have post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD. Maybe they're transgender. And maybe this can help you to recognize and feel an affinity with DEI. It can all help to make DEI feel very relevant. All right, if I still haven't managed it, and none of these examples are giving you anything that you can hook onto and feel related to, then let me give you a more general example. Have you ever worried that you weren't good enough, or that you were out of your depth, or unsure that your skills or your experience were enough to get you through whatever you had to do next? Have you ever worried about how to move forwards? That feeling, in the absence of anything else, is a good analogy to how people who are different feel. It's a good starting point, I think. But recognize that for those people, the reason that they feel different is a characteristic that they were born with, right? It's not something that they can learn. Perhaps it's something that they've acquired, like a disability or PTSD, but they can't help it anymore, right? This is just something which is an innate part of them. And to be discriminated against for something that is an innate part of them, to be made to feel different all the time for something which is an innate part of them, that is what we're talking about. So it's not exactly the same as the example that I gave you of feeling out of your depth or worrying about your skills, but I think that would be a good base. That would be something for you to build on, a foundation to build on. If that's the only way that you can start to feel a connection with this area of DEI, I think that's good enough, right? And we can build on that. So let me move on to the second reason why I think you should pay attention and find a way to engage, which was the feeling that maybe DEI is a nice to have thing and it's not really such a high priority to me that I should spend time on this. I know that there are a limited number of strategic initiatives that you can prioritize. I know that when you invest in an organization-wide strategic priority, it keeps something else off the table. You can't do everything that comes along. You have to make choices. I know that you have to be critical and selective, and there's no reason why a DEI related initiative will get a magic spot as a strategic priority. That's not what I'm expecting at all. What I'm asking you to do is to consider it in the same way as you would consider any other strategic initiative. Consider the possible outcomes, consider the need of your customers or your employees, and consider its benefits to your employees, to your customers, to your business outcomes, just as you would do any other initiative that you're considering making a strategic priority or retaining a strategic priority. I've talked before about how diversity initiatives, by which I mean representational initiatives like having a target of women in leadership or a target of people of colour in tech roles or whatever it may be. These diversity initiatives, in my opinion, don't deserve any more to be a strategic priority. I think that they've done a very good job for us to now, but now we know better, and now we need to up our game, and we need to have a different kind of DEI initiative that we consider as a strategic priority. I'm not going to go into that in huge amounts of detail here. You can listen to episode 8 if you want to hear more, but I think it's enough to say now that all DEI initiatives are not created equal, right? So if I told you, if I hadn't just been talking about DEI initiatives and you knew that that was what I was about to say, but if I told you that there's an initiative that you can put in place that's going to increase your employee engagement, increase your employee wellness, reduce employee turnover, help you to attract top talent from a more than 40% bigger talent pool, help you to be more innovative, not only generating ideas, but also implementing them and getting benefit from them, and help you to be more resilient in weathering the changes that are thrown at you by this crazy world that we're living in these days. If I told you that, you'd probably be interested, right? If I told you that and you ignored it, don't you think that your peers or your owners or your stakeholders would think that you were negligent in your role if you didn't at least learn a bit more and investigate what could this mean? Is this something that we actually should consider as a strategic initiative, a strategic priority, and consider it just as you do anything else? So there is a kind of DEI initiative that can deliver all of these things, and it's not 20% of women in leadership. Sorry for those programs, but it's not that anymore. It's the kind of initiative that I specialize in. It's a universal design of DEI. That's how I see it. And the approach is to design a culture that welcomes and enables all styles of thinking, cognitive styles. It is a cognitive diversity initiative, but it's not enough, right? It's not enough to just have cognitively diverse teams full of different thinking styles. You also have to ensure that those teams know how to work together. You have to train people to work with people who are different from them in how they take in information, in how they process information, in how they communicate information. And that is what I'm talking about is building a culture of cognitive inclusion. And that is the kind of priority that I urge you to consider as a strategic priority on the same merits as you would consider anything else. That kind of initiative, a cognitively inclusive culture, is a universal design because it improves things for everybody across all dimensions: gay, straight, off colour, white, whichever generation you're from, whichever educational background, including straight white men like you, right? So it improves things for everybody. It's universal. I talk more about that in other episodes. But for now, I'll just emphasize that the research about a culture of cognitive inclusion does support everything that I'm saying. This is not an opinion. Yes, I've experienced it, but it's also based in evidence that's published. Learn more about it by listening to other episodes. And if you can't wait for the other episodes, or you don't want to spend the time to find them, then you can just send me an email and I'm happy to suggest some reading to you or get on a call with you and suggest how you can start to learn about this so you can see for yourself. All right, so let's assume that I've now convinced you that DEI is not irrelevant to you, straight white man, and it's not too low of a priority for you to at least consider. You're bought into the possibility that you may want to invest in an initiative of cognitive inclusion as a strategic priority. And the third problem is that it's quite intimidating to get started in this area. There can be a huge amount of internal resistance to starting to work in this area as a straight white man, especially, not only, but perhaps especially from what I hear. Now, I talked about an aspect of this, which was the pressure from the media spotlight in episode 11 of this podcast. And I made a few comments in that episode that I want to build on here because I think it's a really good way for you to make it manageable to enter this area of DEI as someone who may only feel a recent affinity or a questionable affinity. So let's say, all right, just summarize. You see DEI is relevant. You want to consider making cognitive inclusion a strategic priority, but you don't know where to start. Okay, let me ask the question in a different way. If this episode was called Artificial Intelligence and the Straight White Male, what can I contribute? Instead of DEI and the straight white male, what can I contribute? You probably wouldn't hesitate, right? You'd know what to do. And that's what I recommend doing. Just do that. Do that. Perhaps you're thinking, but Lisa, cognitive inclusion or a cognitively inclusive culture is not a product or a service. Really? Are you really sure about that? Why can't we consider it to be a product or a service? Okay, you can't put a price on your cognitively inclusive culture and sell it to your customers, but it's critical to have in place for that young generation of talent who is coming through. Not all products that you have in your organization, I'm betting, are products for your customers. I bet some of your products that you have built and that you iterate and you optimize are for your internal people. All of those products, of course, have financial benefit for your talent and for your business outcomes associated with them. And that is also the case for a cognitively inclusive culture. So let's take another possible objection. Maybe you're not thinking, but Lisa, cognitive inclusion isn't a product. Maybe you're thinking, but Lisa, you can't measure cognitive inclusion, so how can I treat it like anything else? Well, that's most things. You can't measure it directly. As well as being an expert in neurodivergence inclusion and cognitively inclusive cultures, I am from an earlier time in my life an expert in the use of research metrics. So metrics about the productivity and impact of universities, research teams, individual researchers, funders, any kind of unit of research that you care to think about. And I used to hear this comment as well. You can't really measure the value of research. Well, we can get very, very close by measuring very good proxies: productivity, impact, whether people are collaborative, whether people are having a positive effect on their immediate surroundings and more broadly on the world. And it's the same with culture, a cognitively inclusive culture. We have extremely good proxies. So we can measure things like engagement, psychological safety, feeling of satisfaction, feeling of employee loyalty. Even though they're feelings and they might feel a bit nebulous, you can measure those quite easily in a well-structured survey. And you can make the feelings, you can convert them into numerical scores. You can also measure the outcomes that you want to drive with with cognitive inclusion. I'm not suggesting that you are going to make a DEI initiative a strategic priority just for the sake of it. I think it's really important that there is a business outcome that you want to drive with your DEI initiative. I've mentioned that for cognitive inclusion, it's almost certainly going to be either better innovation or something to do with talent retention, right? It's going to be engagement or acquisition of talent or retention of talent. And all of those very tangible outcomes are things that you can measure as a result of improving your inclusive culture. So what I'm saying is that if you would build a traditional product or a service, and you didn't feel that you knew everything about it, hopefully you never feel that you know everything about it, you would start off by doing research. Do that here as well with DEI. That's what you should do. You can call it user testing, you can call it customer research. Users or the customers are your employees in this case. If it helps you to call this user testing or customer research, fine, call it that. But do the research. Understand what the needs are. Understand why this is important to people. Understand what a difference it would make. Ask people. Talk to people. Consult your ERG, your employee resource groups, or your employee networks, right? If you want me to recommend things, I can recommend things in a style that you prefer, a scientific style or a personal anecdote style or a chatty style or whatever you like. Have a go at learning the language, right? Practice using the language, just like you did when you started learning about artificial intelligence. And try out a few small steps or a pilot to build your confidence. If you try out a few small steps and it doesn't work, then you haven't really lost very much. It doesn't really matter. So doesn't what I'm describing now sound a lot like building a traditional minimum viable product, an MVP? Pretty much, right? So I think if you see inclusion as a tangible product that can be measured, or a strategic initiative, then it will help you to be critical when you evaluate the potential of this as a strategic priority that you may or may not adopt. It will help you to drive impact from an initiative if you go ahead with it, and it will help you to stay the course, because of course this is something that you don't do in a couple of days. This takes a couple of years or maybe even longer. So think about it as a product and act accordingly. Okay, coming to the summary, or I'm at the summary. So you're a straight white male and you're reluctant to engage in DEI because you think you don't understand all aspects of DEI. That would also be true if you are a gay woman of color. No one person understands all the aspects of DEI because we're all only some things and not everything. So just as any initiative, right, the whole idea of deciding how you're going to go ahead with DEI and putting it in place and testing to make sure that it's going well, it has to be a shared responsibility. There has to be someone accountable, there have to be people responsible, there has to be key stakeholders that you consult, and there are people that you inform. Just like any other initiative, it's not different. It's so important that you, as a straight white male, in your position of historical privilege, that you take the opportunity and the trouble to engage and understand and commit. And if you do that, I promise you, you'll see it's better for your talent and it's better for the success of your organization.